Hi pals and welcome to a new video. I'm Kate and today we're doing the end of the year book tag. I always love book tags as they're such a good way to talk about books that might have otherwise slipped through the cracks, so let's go ahead and get started. I think Ariel Bissett created this tag along with the mid-year freakout tag, which I also really enjoyed doing, so a big thank you to her. Right, I have the list of questions in front of me, so if you see me looking down, that's why. The first question is, are there any books that you started this year that you still need to finish? And the answer is yes, I have two. One is non-fiction and one is a novel, although I am going to put the novel on a long pause, I think. First up, for non-fiction, it is Dickens' The Enchanter by Peter Conrad. This was a kind of unofficial companion read to Victoria for me. I'm about halfway through this and I'm thoroughly enjoying it so far. This is definitely one for Dickens enthusiasts rather than beginners, as there is an awful lot packed in here, and without a kind of working knowledge of his major works especially, I think you would probably struggle with this. That's no bad thing, because I do love a literary biog that pitches itself more at the kind of intermediate or advanced readers. I by no means consider myself a kind of Dickens expert or advanced level Dickens, but I know enough to kind of have taken a lot from this so far. The basic premise of this is that the Dickens we know, who is very firmly ensconced as a national treasure, hides a much darker, stranger, weirder Dickens that reveals itself in the novels, and that far from being the kind of embodiment of Victoriana, he held Victorian society and especially the establishments of that society in contempt, which I feel like you will have a kind of understanding of if you've read a few of his works. Like I said, so far so good with this one. My favourite chapter so far is the one called The Great Creator, which is on his relationship with Christianity. But in that chapter they also talk about the influence of Frankenstein on Dickens, which I found absolutely fascinating. And it also touched on how Frankenstein is referenced in Great Expectations. It goes unnamed, but the reference is definitely in there. And it has made me think that I would quite like to reread Frankenstein. I've read it once or twice before. The last time I read it, I will say I found it a tad bit boring. I did also listen to an episode of The Secret Life of Books recently. It was either on Frankenstein or Wuthering Heights, and they were talking about how there is this thread from Paradise Lost through Frankenstein to Wuthering Heights. And I did think while I was listening to that, I would love to reread Paradise Lost and Frankenstein. And so this is my second thing that's prompted me now. So that is Dickens' The Enchanter. I'll probably finish this in the next week or so. And I am also planning to do a bumper wrap up of what I've read over September, October and November. So you'll probably see this pop up again. The second book that I have started but haven't yet finished is The Golden Notebook by Doris Lessing. This is a novel about a writer living in London in the 1950s, and she keeps 4 notebooks which she attempts to bring together in a golden notebook. Those notebooks are an account of her life, life as a writer, her life as a member of the Communist Party, her relationships. I was enjoying this. I got about halfway through, and it's by no means a short book either. I think it's probably around 700 pages. And then I put it down for about a month and a half as I moved house in spring. And this is not the type of book that you can kind of put down and then come back to. And so I just lost a sense of momentum with it. And then when I attempted to pick it back up again, I found that I was getting quite irritated with the time being spent on the kind of internal wranglings of the British Communist Party. I don't think that is the book. I think it was just me being a little bit stressed by moving. I could have pushed on and finished this, but it would have been doing what is a very good book a disservice. So I decided to put it on hold, and I think what I'll do with this is give it a little bit of time and then come back to it with a fresh pair of eyes. I have read other things by Doris Lessing and I've always really enjoyed them, so potentially the right book, but I was reading it at the wrong time. On to the second question. The second question is, do you have an autumnal book to help you transition to the end of the year? At the beginning of autumn, I always head to classic crime, golden age crime to get me in the mood for autumn. I did exactly that this year, and I made a whole video about the classic crime that I had been reading for cozy season. I read Endless Night, The Daughter of Time and Tea on Sunday, which is a recently reissued crime novel from the British Library. I thoroughly enjoyed all three of those, and I'll link the video down below. If you're in the UK, I always count Bonfire Night, the 5th of November, as the official start of winter. And on Bonfire Night, I read The Sitterford Mystery by Agatha Christie. That is one of my favourite novels from her to read over winter. The Sitterford Mystery is set on Dartmoor in winter. There has been a snowstorm, and the novel opens at an evening kind of party in a manor house where the guests decide to hold a seance. It's just such a terrific read over winter. I would say the reveal, the whodunit in this, isn't my favourite, although I do think it's a solidly good mystery. I am hoping to do a video on classic crime for winter, and I wanted to pop that one in there, and so I wanted a refresher, but I really enjoyed reading this on Bonfire Night, and that was my first official read of winter. Question 3 is there a new release that you're still waiting for? The two books that I was waiting to be published have arrived over the past couple of weeks. The first one is The Rosefield by Philip Pullman. This is the third instalment in the Book of Dust series and the last book in the kind of His Dark Materials wider volumes. I've been slowly reading the Book of Dust and His Dark Materials in story order for this release. I haven't finished them all yet, and I think I'm going to save this as a Christmas read. I'm listening to them on audiobook, and I had to pop some on hold to get through my Victober reading, but I'm ready to pick them back up again, and I'm going to save this as a treat to read when I have time off work over Christmas. I've got this beautiful slipcase edition, which I haven't yet taken the kind of the plastic wrapper off, so it'll be all shiny, but I'm really excited to get to this, and I think I'll be quite emotional when I finish, but I know that I definitely need a refresher on the story, as it's been 5 years since I read book 2 in the Book of Dust series, and a fair old while since I've reread them all, so I want to take my time with this so I can enjoy it as much as possible. And the second book that I was waiting for is the British Library's Christmas Classic of the Year. Every year they issue a kind of Christmas murder mystery. This year's is Death in Ambush by Susan Gilruth. This was originally published in the 1950s, I think, set in Kent, and a kind of local nobleman is found murdered. I have an annual tradition of reading their kind of newly republished Christmas mystery every year, and I always have such a good time with them. They always manage to find such interesting stories. Last year's one, Murder After Christmas, which I have here by Rupert Latimer. This is set during the Second World War, and a guest is found murdered on Boxing Day dressed as Father Christmas. Thoroughly enjoyed this one, so I have very high hopes for this. This was published at the beginning of October. Right, there are so many books that I want to talk about in this video. I've refreshed the big pile of them next to me, and we'll go on to question 4, which is, what 3 books do you want to finish before the end of the year? And I'm going to slightly cheat with this question because I have some ongoing reading projects that I know I want to read novels for before the end of the year. I'm planning on reading Dickens in publication order. In Victober, I read the Pickwick Papers, and I had such a good time with that. The next book on the list is Oliver Twist, Nicholas Nickleby, and then The Old Curiosity Shop. I would love to get to Oliver Twist and Nicholas Nickleby by the end of the year. I have read Oliver Twist before, and I will say that it's not my favourite Dickens, although I haven't read it for maybe like 15 or 20 years, so I really do want to go into it with an open mind. And then I haven't read Nicholas Nickleby, so that will be a new one to me, which I'm really excited about. And I would love to start next year with The Old Curiosity Shop, which is one of my favourite Dickens novels. I really adore it, so that would be starting 2026 on a high. I will be listening to Oliver Twist definitely on audiobook, and I'll have to wait and see about Nicholas Nickleby. They'll both be quite long, so I don't know if I'll be able to definitely get to them, but that is kind of the plan that I'm working towards. My second reading project was that this year, for Jane Austen's 250th anniversary, I wanted to read all of her novels across the year. So far, I've read Pride and Prejudice in January, Persuasion February, Sense and Sensibility in May, and I read Emma for Jane Austen in July. I have really enjoyed all of those so far. Sense and Sensibility is the one where I think potentially I've just outgrown it a little bit. I have left a little bit of a gap between finishing Emma for Jane Austen in July and then reading Mansfield Park, and I also have Northanger Abbey. That is because the one that I'm going to head to next is Mansfield Park, and much like Oliver Twist, actually, I know it's not my favourite Austen. I've only ever read Mansfield Park once, potentially twice. Every adaptation of it, I've always been kind of lukewarm to not very much enjoying. I am trying to head into it with an open mind because I haven't read it for such a long time. It's entirely possible that I will read it and love it, but I have to say I have been putting it off a little bit. So I'm going to start this in November, and then I think when I'm done with that, I will head to Northanger Abbey straight away. I really like Northanger Abbey, and I'm really looking forward to watching the ITV adaptation of this, which I also really enjoy. This is perfect to read in kind of winter as well because it's really gothic. So yeah, I will get to both of those, and then I will do a video on kind of my thoughts on rereading all the novels this year, where I would kind of rank them. Potentially Mansfield Park could end up as my favourite, but somehow I just don't think so. The third thing that I know I want to do is tackle one of the longer 800-page plus novels on my TBR. That's because I have a good chunk of time off work in December over Christmas and the New Year, and I always read a lot in that period as well. In one of my videos, which was the big book tag, books worth every page, which I'll link down below, I mentioned some of the ones I have on my TBR. I mentioned Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, which is definitely a contender for a book to read over Christmas. But I'm also thinking I could tackle a longer classic I've had on my shelves for years, but I've never read The Count of Monte Cristo. I do know the story of this, which is why I think I've held off reading it, but I'm thinking this could be a potential too. And I'm also thinking I could potentially reread Dr. Zhivago because I love this novel. I love the story. It's perfect to read over Christmas. Could also be the one. We'll have to wait and see what I'm feeling like when it gets to Christmas. Question 5 is there a book you think could still surprise you and become a favourite of the year? In November or early December, I'm planning on reading The Shuttle by Frances Hodgson Burnett. Now, this time last year, at exactly the same time last year, I read The Making of a Marchioness, also by Frances Hodgson Burnett, and that became one of my favourite reads of the year. She's always been a favourite of mine because she's the author of The Secret Garden, but getting to her adult novels has been something of a revelation. This one was published in 1906 or 1907, so the Edwardian era. Some of her novels are also late Victorian, but I'm really excited to get to this one. This is a Persephone edition. It's quite a long novel, especially for her, at around 500 pages. This novel is about American heiresses marrying into the English aristocracy. If you watched my history TBR, the history books that I'm really excited to get to, you'll know that I also have a non-fiction history book on the same subject to get to, so they're great companion reads. And it's also meant to be about the effect of kind of American affluence and American energy on what is quite a kind of impoverished English aristocracy. But the reason why I picked this up a few years ago is because Persephone books always describe this as having a heroine on a par with like Lizzie Bennet, Isabel Archer, and so it just sounds fab. I also think that this is meant to be quite the page turner. I'm really excited for this, and as an aside, it has the most beautiful, it probably won't show up, it has the most beautiful end papers of any Persephone edition I've seen. I have a really good feeling about this, and I also have some of her historical fiction, A Lady of Quality, which was published in about 1896, so it's very late Victorian, to get to after I finished this one. But she is fast becoming a favourite, not only for her kids' classics, which I loved when I was growing up, but also for her adult novels. So fingers crossed. Right, and on to question 6, which is the last question. Have you started making reading plans for next year? And the answer is a rough plan, yes. I already know I'll be reading a lot of Dickens, like I mentioned. I'm reading Agatha Christie, Miss Marple and Poirot in order. And I'm also planning on getting to quite a lot of her standalones. I'm also reading George Orwell in publication order. There's a few authors who I would also love to get to, but I know for definite I'll be concentrating on those 3. I'm also going to be joining the read-along for Lord of the Rings hosted by Reads. That is a book a month from the Lord of the Rings trilogy, January through March. I've been thinking about rereading these for quite a while, so when she announced this, I just thought it was perfect timing, and that will be something to kind of really help me get through that kind of deep winter period. I'll link her announcement video or video with the details below, so I'm really excited for that. And I have some kind of rough plans also. One of the things that I've done in the later half of the year is really switch my focus on to some slightly bigger classics. I have been thinking that I would love to read Clarissa by Samuel Richardson, which is the ultimate big classic. I wanted to get to this for quite a while, and I think I might tackle it next year. I think that what I'm going to do though is I always, when I haven't read a classic, I prefer to read a physical copy first. However, with this, Naxos Audiobooks have split this into 2 volumes, I believe, and the cast of narrators is so fantastic that I think that that might be the way for me to tackle this one. So that is kind of a rough plan at the moment. In my summer book haul, I hauled The Forsyte Saga by John Galsworthy. Now that I've finished Parade's End, I really want to get to that. And also, if you're in the UK, Channel 5 have just adapted, I think roughly adapted this into a series called The Forsytes. There was a previous adaptation of this from the early noughties which I thoroughly enjoyed and I must rewatch at some point. But an advert popped up for The Forsytes, the Channel 5 version, and it reminded me that I really want to get to that. It just seems very similar in subject and tone to Parade's End. So I really want to get to that in the new year. And then I also want to tackle a few more big Russian classics. I have gotten to some of the major ones already, but I want to read Stalingrad and then Life and Fate by Vasily Grossman. I would love to get to Stalingrad in the first half of the year and then get to Life and Fate in the second half of the year. I think reading them too close together might be a little bit too intense. Right, that's it for the end of the year book tag. I would love to hear from you in the comments, as always, what you're reading in November and December, what your plans are, and if you've read any of these and what your thoughts were. And I will see you all in the next video. Bye!